Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham Jail was written on April 16, 1963, during his imprisonment for participating in nonviolent demonstrations against racial segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. The letter is a powerful defense of civil disobedience and a passionate plea for justice, equality, and human dignity. Addressed to 8 white clergymen who criticized King's actions as unwise and untimely, the letter systematically dismantles their arguments while articulating the moral and philosophical basis for the civil rights movement. King begins by explaining his presence in Birmingham, asserting that he was invited by local affiliates of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and highlighting his moral responsibility to fight injustice wherever it exists. He invokes the interconnectedness of communities, famously stating, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." This sets the stage for his justification of direct action and his critique of the clergyman's call for patience. Critique of wait and the urgency of action. King rejects the clergyman's suggestion that African Americans should wait for a more convenient season to pursue civil rights. He emphasizes that oppressed people cannot wait indefinitely for justice, as their suffering and dehumanization continue unabated. Drawing on history, he notes that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor but must be demanded by the oppressed. He underscores the urgency of action, explaining that African Americans have waited for over 340 years for their constitutional and God-given rights. King also discusses the psychological toll of racism, providing vivid examples of the humiliation, fear, and frustration experienced by Black Americans. By sharing personal and communal pain, he humanizes the plight of African Americans, making the moral necessity of immediate action undeniable. Just versus unjust laws. A central theme of the letter is the distinction between just and unjust laws. King argues that individuals have a moral responsibility to obey just laws but are equally obligated to disobey unjust ones. He defines a just law as one that aligns with moral law or the law of God, while an unjust law is one that degrades human personality or is imposed by a majority on a minority without representation. He supports this argument with references to theologians like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, as well as historical figures like Martin Luther and the Boston Tea Party participants. King also critiques the misuse of legality to perpetuate injustice, pointing out that Adolf Hitler's actions were legal under German law. This underscores his belief that morality, not legality, is the ultimate measure of justice. Nonviolent direct action. King defends the strategy of nonviolent direct action, explaining that it seeks to create a crisis and foster tension that forces a community to confront and negotiate injustices it has long ignored. He clarifies that nonviolent action is not a call to violence but a means to achieve constructive, creative tension that can lead to growth and change. In response to criticism that demonstrations disrupt societal order, King argues that such tension is necessary for progress. He likens it to the tension Socrates created in ancient Greece, which spurred critical thinking and enlightenment. By deliberately fostering discomfort, nonviolent action compels those in power to address systemic inequities. Criticism of white moderates. One of the letter's most poignant sections critiques white moderates, whom King considers a significant obstacle to progress. He argues that their preference for order over justice and their insistence on gradualism are more frustrating than outright opposition. While extremists like the Ku Klux Klan are openly hostile, white moderates' passive complicity perpetuates the status quo. King underscores this by expressing disappointment with their lack of urgency and their superficial support for civil rights, which often translates to a desire for Black Americans to remain silent and patient. He calls for allies to recognize the depth of the injustice and to stand actively for equality. The role of the Church. King's letter also critiques the complacency of the Christian Church. He laments that many religious leaders have failed to support the civil rights movement, choosing instead to align with the status quo or to offer superficial, uninspired endorsements of change. He contrasts this with the early Christian church, which was a force for social transformation and justice. Despite his disappointment, King expresses hope that the church can reclaim its prophetic role as a moral leader in the fight against injustice. He reminds the clergy of their spiritual responsibility to oppose oppression and to embody the principles of love and equality. Addressing extremism, King addresses accusations of being an extremist by reframing the term. He acknowledges that, while he initially resented the label, he has come to embrace it as a compliment when seen through the lens of historical figures like Jesus, Abraham Lincoln, and Thomas Jefferson, who were also considered extremists for their commitments to justice. King urges his readers to recognize the value of constructive extremism in the pursuit of righteousness. Optimism and hope. Despite the challenges and criticisms, King expresses optimism about the eventual triumph of justice. He draws inspiration from the resilience of African Americans and their willingness to endure suffering for the sake of freedom. He also believes that the arc of the moral universe, though long, bends toward justice. King's faith in the power of love, truth, and human decency underpins his unwavering commitment to the struggle. He concludes the letter by affirming his belief in reconciliation and the possibility of a more equitable society. King's Letter from Birmingham Jail is a masterful blend of moral reasoning, philosophical argumentation, and emotional appeal. It articulates the necessity of confronting injustice, the urgency of civil rights, and the moral imperative of nonviolent resistance. The letter serves as both a defense of King's actions and a call to action for individuals and institutions to align themselves with the principles of justice, equality, and human dignity. Its enduring relevance lies in its universal message that justice requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to challenge systems of oppression, no matter how entrenched they may seem.